We've been talking about Lyme disease for the last half hour or so on the programme. I said the response was huge, and it really is. Calls, texts, tweets, an awful lot of people reacting to what you've been hearing. David texts us, I've been seen by 4 doctors, all of whom failed to identify the rash, even though I live in a hotspot for Lyme in North Scotland. Doctors really need to keep educating themselves after they qualify. Eventually persuaded a doctor to test, and it was positive, but it was another month before I got treatment. Dismal service. I was reading that statement from the Department of Health and Social Care, and it said in it, Public Health England regularly holds GP training days. NICE recently published new guidelines for care to ensure that people have prompt diagnosis and treatment. And John Caudwell, who you were listening to, John, you were shaking your head through that, through all of it, but through that part of it in particular.
Yes, I was, because whilst it's absolutely true that they conducted a study into Lyme disease, I think it's a really disingenuous misrepresentation of the facts. The simple fact is that study, which did change the NICE guidelines, and slightly for the better, because it dealt with antibiotics over a longer period than 2 weeks, and it increased the period of antibiotics. But that was for acute Lyme disease. That was when you get a bullseye rash, when you get the symptoms, when you're lucky enough for the doctor to diagnose it, and when you're lucky enough for that doctor to then understand that you need several weeks of antibiotics, not just 2 weeks, that you need 4 to 6 weeks of antibiotics. So yes, it's a step in the right direction, but it does absolutely nothing for chronic Lyme disease sufferers. And furthermore, it went on to say that much research was needed to get evidence-based science to prove the situation. And nothing has happened on that at all. So as a result of the NICE guidelines, the outlook for chronic Lyme disease sufferers is still every bit as bad as it was before, because something needs to be done.
Thank you, John. Andrew's been in touch as well. Hello, Andrew.
Hello, good morning.
Hi, we were talking about the rash then, that text that David sent. 4 doctors failed to identify the rash. And this is something that you had back in 2010. You were bitten by a tick and you had the rash.
I did. I had the rash. It was misdiagnosed as an ordinary insect bite followed by cellulitis. But what happened following that was a series of other symptoms, devastating symptoms, which accumulated. And each time I saw different doctors and they diagnosed different things. This included eventually stroke and then another stroke. And then a possible brain tumour because the infection had actually gone to my brain. And then they settled on multiple sclerosis. A few weeks later, they backtracked, the doctors, the consultants, and said that they weren't quite sure what it was. It wasn't MS. And then I had to find my own way, find my own answers, and then receive treatment eventually. But it was a long road over 2 years, and then 2 or 3 years to recover. So I commend John Caudwell for making a stand, for saying honest things about the devastation of Lyme disease, because I'm a prime example of how it can go wrong.
Did you know at the time, Andrew, when you were going through those various misdiagnoses, had you heard of Lyme? Did you know what it was?
No, I had no idea. And this is a cruel irony of the first misdiagnosis of cellulitis because of an innocuous insect bite. The doctor at the A&E ward said that it was, had I been anywhere exotic? And I just come back from Wales. And I said, does Wales count as exotic? And then he said no. So I was given 5 days of standard broad-spectrum antibiotics, which did nothing for a Lyme infection.
And eventually the treatment that you did get, and you 3/4 recovered from this, it was an antibiotic treatment, was it?
Yes, it was. I had 3 different types that were pulsed or rotated over a number of months. Incidentally, regarding the tests, I had a mixture of negative, equivocal and positive, both within the NHS and abroad, privately. So I was pretty convinced, and the GP was so convinced that I was treated empirically. I made about 75% recovery, enough to write a novel about why things must change, called Anatomized. And I wrote it because I feel passionately, obviously, about this cruel sort of, this stage that people can go through. And I wanted to raise awareness.
We've certainly done that. Andrew, thank you so much for coming on. That's Andrew, who was bitten by a tick in 2010 and talked about having that rash dismissed at A&E. A few themes emerging, looking at the messages that you were sending in, particularly the number of you had to go abroad, particularly to Germany, to get some kind of diagnosis. And it sounds in so many cases like it was a real, as it was with Andrew, a real journey of having to push and be tested for different things and dismiss different things at different times. I can't see, and maybe your experience was different. And if it was, do please share this morning. 85058 at BBC5 Live. If yours was a simple and straightforward diagnosis and you got the treatment you need, because those are the texts, the tweets that I'm really not seeing this morning. So if they're out there, do share. I'm sure we'll talk much more about this through the programme because, as I say, there has been a huge reaction to it. So you'll hear more about this between now and 1 o'clock today on the programme.